Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Grow Sessions, sponsored by our good friends at TSRgrow. Today, I'm actually really happy to welcome Mikhail Sagal from TSRgrow, founder, CEO of TSRgrow, so the show's sponsor, but also a good friend who I've known, boy, going back what, maybe 10 years, Mikhail, that we've known each other and been in the space together.
I think yeah, it's been a long time and we've chatted, we've worked together, we've done a lot of things and super appreciative that you are our host and that we get to chat here. So yeah, it's been a long time. It's been a
Yeah,
long time.
yeah, it's been a long time. I mean, going all the way back, I met you and Gary, and I think maybe Tony wasn't even part of the company yet, back in the early days in Boston, NECAN. We would be there together, and that's where we met. And I feel like that was probably about 10 years ago. And those were great shows. The it was a different market back then, really, wasn't it?
It was yeah, it was really ground roots, kind of grassroots level. Uh Exciting, a lot of stuff happening, really at the forefront of kind of laying the foundation of what all of this has kind of become in the industry and maybe the good old days. I don't know. Maybe the good old days.
Maybe the good old days. That things are different now. But 10 years ago, LEDs, you were very early, I feel like, to the space. My experience when LEDs first hit the market was that they were underpowered. They were being sold on this idea that they were a pure one-to-one replacement. We heard that all the time. Oh, this is a one-to-one replacement. If you've got 100 double-ended HPS 1000 watt, just put in 100 of our fixtures and you're good to go. Then the facilities were underlit. There were issues. They were trying to figure out spectrum. They were trying to figure out they were wildly expensive, all that stuff. So, what made you say, I'm going to enter this space. I'm going to be early to this space, first mover, whatever. What made you think that that was a good idea and that's what you wanted to do? And obviously 10 years later, here you are. It's a great idea, but what made you do it?
I'd like to ask myself what was I thinking, No. Um, but the it's interesting. I wanted to be in the LED space from the beginning. And actually, before horticulture, I started the company in early 2009 with the intention of, this is when blue diodes were just efficient enough to turn into light bulbs and add phosphor to really work in kind of commercial and lighting space. And saw that as a truly emerging market, a huge market opportunity, and really wanted to participate in that space. And had been in a, kind of parallel industry that lended itself with its technology to LEDs and their utilization and adoption. So started the company to really get into the space. Actually, the TSR is Thermal Solution Resources, which was a consulting company designing and really bringing advanced kind of design approaches to LEDs to really optimize how you use it. A lot of people were just shoehorning LEDs and trying to force fit it into existing applications. So wanted to really get into LED. And as we evolved into our technology and approach and other things, and really looking at a solution-minded approach, when we got into horticulture, and got involved with some of the plant scientists and applications and made the decision to launch TSRgrow as our own branded company. We took that same approach, looking really forward and thinking we can do this better. There's a better way to do it. Let's find a way to make it much more efficient, long-term thinking about data driven applications, knowing what's happening. And really our biggest kind of beef was that, getting rid of the driver on the fixture. And that was our differentiator is getting rid of the drivers, centralizing everything and moving that forward. And we thought that was a good idea. And I think, today I can honestly say I think it is a good idea, and that's where we are now.
So and for anybody who's not familiar, right? When we say you remove the driver, you've got a driver on the fixture. Typically, they're one unit or they're two units that sort of hang together in the grow environment. That driver is where power comes in and it converts and it goes into the LED diode array and creates light. But that driver creates some heat. It's bulky, it's in the way, whatever. There's good reason maybe to move it out. But beyond just it's now in the hallway, which I think back to the olden days when people were hanging ballasts outside, right? And they'd run the cord from the ballast up and over and into the room for the old double-ended or even single-ended days. But you also it goes from 480 volt uh, AC to a DC and it changes, right? You're changing how that power is applied. It transforms in the process, going from what is essentially a server cabinet that you guys use to the fixture that has the diodes and makes the light. So why? What is the advantage to doing it that way?
Well, one of the a couple advantages, really, but in the beginning it was, whether it's HPS or LED, whatever it is, but the ballast, the typical failure on a fixture is that driver or ballast. Kind of both names can be used, interchangeably, but that's a weak point in a fixture. LEDs, the diodes, they're basically a switching, micro switching little switching diode, and it'll last a very long time. But the electronics have so many electronics in them that when you put them in a big room, low power applications, less susceptible to issues. But when you get into high power, many, many watts of energy and lots of different switching power supplies, you have thousands of components. You've got harmonics, you've got other things, and they start to fight against each other, and that becomes a weak point. Maybe they, could be 1%, could be 5%. In some applications, there's been hundreds or, close to 100% failure on those drivers. And that was our impetus, is really get that maintenance outside of the room, let the room be the clean room, and remove any of that kind of infrastructure out of the room. It could be in a kind of a server room, could be in the hallway, could be in a mezzanine. And with that, then also comes the ability to simplify the installation. Your maintenance is now moved outside, but really the installation, you save a significant 50% on installation costs. You don't need contactor panels. You don't need relays. If something does occur, you can do all your maintenance outside. The controls now become centralized, where you have a lot more capabilities and information around how you're growing and how you're using the energy. And you really start to get to the point where you can deliver the photons where you need it, when you need it, and start to really move towards crop steering of lighting, kind of, and bringing that together with crop steering on the fertigation side, and really holistically looking at really optimizing how you grow any crop. I mean, we're talking about cannabis, but really any strain, any crop, any plant that you're growing, you can really optimize it for in all senses for forest growth.
So you mentioned the data. Explain to me in layman's terms why you can capture this data and use the data with the way that you set up the essentially the server cabinet, the drivers, the AC to DC. What allows you to capture the data and use the data off of that isn't available in a standard driver?
The basically standard drivers are very low cost. They have no intelligence with them. They're stuck on fixtures. They have very, just they're there to convert power, from take in power and turn on the diodes and switch back and forth. But there's no data or information around it. And in order to communicate with those, you have to run additional communication wires, which are usually control signals that just tell it to turn on and off or dim. And with the approach we take is that um, by centralizing that power, we are way more efficient at taking the AC power and converting it to DC that gets delivered to the lights, but also it becomes a centralized brain, and we have the ability with to really collect and know exactly how much energy is being used at any given time, as well as then with software direct where that energy is delivered. So not only can we say deliver this energy here at any given moment and a certain amount for percentages of dimming or spectral tuning, but then we also have the data collection around, how much energy is being delivered. Is there something going wrong? What's transpiring with that data, with that power and with that energy? And we can start to connect that into, other building management systems and really then allow you to optimize it. But it's kind of a two-way. You have data not only going out, but also coming back.
Okay. So with that, right, one of the things I find interesting is the evolution of how we measure our efficiency of cultivation. We used to talk about pounds per light. We started talking about grams per square foot. And it would seem like having that data very readily available gives us the ability to talk about grams per kilowatt or per kilowatt hour and look at efficiency and production in that metric. Do you find that growers, operators, CFOs that you're working with, once they have that data, are they adopting it that way? Are they using it to measure their efficiency?
That is definitely the direction where we see it going, is really being able to optimize grams per watt, or utilization, but not only being able to now do that and compare every cycle, or every time you run a particular strain and run it in a cycle in a given room, you can now start to compare consistency and repeatability and costs to run that strain. But you also now have much more data and capability to compare that strain across sites or across states or across, multiple areas. So you really can see, how sites are performing, and start to really, take a look at what are differences. Um, my background is, I kind of look at it as my background is thermal engineering, and we always, or mechanical engineering, but along with, if we were ever measured temperature, you had a thermocouple, and you put a thermocouple on something and you measured it, but it was only one point. So you kind of, okay, that point is at X temperature at that particular point, but you didn't really get an overview of really how's everything looking and what's the consistency. But if you take an infrared camera and you now look at the room, you can see all temperature points and everything that's going on, and you get a really holistic view of what's happening. And your eyes, it becomes an awareness. I did it once in my house, and you could see, yeah, I knew there was a draft, but finding it exactly, and you could see the whole temperature variations. It's kind of like that, where now you have a holistic view of energy, environment, and power and efficiency on how you grow, and you can now start to really have a more global view and a holistic view of everything that's happening to allow you to make better decisions about your operation.
So one of the things you mentioned that is, I guess, somewhat near and dear to my heart is failure points. As someone who manages construction facilities, I'm constantly, either trying to mitigate or eliminate or dealing with in real time failure points in cultivation facilities. And certainly over the years, I've sold a lot of different LED brands, in my previous roles. I've installed, I've managed them, I've bought and all the stuff, dealt with them. I've seen failures, right? We all have across the entire industry. And I said the other day, I was interviewed and I said, there's probably four, maybe five, LED companies that I would trust from a quality standpoint, right? If that's the only metric I'm looking at is just quality and who would I talk to, who would I bid, who would I work with, there's maybe four or five. Now, all of those companies, more or less, I've seen have issues. I will say, for what it's worth, I've never had an issue with your fixtures. Um, so I'm not saying you've had this issue, but I've seen it with other really big players, right? Driver failures, diode failures, delamination, which is like a structural issue with the way the unit was built, if it used that sort of build style. Why is that, right? Why can you have a company that however many millions or having hundreds of millions of dollars maybe in a year that they're doing in business revenue wise, they're manufacturing a ton of these things. They all seem to have the issues. And to be honest with you, it goes all the way back to the HPS days where we saw, issues ripple through the big HPS manufacturers as well. Sometimes it had to do with the fact that they were sourcing a certain component from one specific provider or one specific spot where they're all manufactured. But, at the end of the day, I've kind of accepted that all equipment has some failure rate to it. Doesn't really matter whether it's LEDs, HVAC, fans, everything has a failure rate. But why does it happen? One, two, how do you mitigate it? How do you work to not have that, be an issue for your customers?
I think in everything there's, as you said, there's always some failure at some point that, could happen. I think, but I think also we've gone into this there's also always a drive to reduce costs. There's a drive to, I mean, globally, there's a drive to, a throwaway culture where it make it so cheap that I just, it's acceptable to just throw something away and have it fail and just replace it. And I think, that is part of the challenges with the, with a lot of fixtures generally that are out there. I would say that, for the most part, our approach to the whole, to our company, or when, I started, and even my business partner, Gary, our core focus has always been service and support, and helping ensure that what we deliver and how we deliver it and how we service it after helps ensure our customers are up and running. I mean, that is paramount function, is that you have to continue running. It's your viability and your output is your crop. And that is everything that we've done, is to help ensure that you have 100% uptime. Is it always 100% or maybe 99.5? But our goal is always to ensure you have an uptime runnability. And part of that with the remote power and our approach to this has been that we've looked at where are the failure points and tried to mitigate those failure points in our solution. And that is, the drivers are 90% of failures on fixtures are the drivers that are on those fixtures or in those fixtures and driving those items. And by decoupling those two things, we now can have a fixture that can run much more reliably in the room and not fail. We have sealed IP66 lenses so that you can take a hose to them, wash them down. There's no delamination. There's no issue. There's not going to be any problems. And so we try to make that, as bulletproof as possible. And then by decoupling the power, we now can also monitor. We have after service. We monitor our equipment. Our guys might call you, Mark, and say, "Hey, can you go check this out?" So we're constantly in touch with and supporting our equipment and our customers. But we've tried to look very hard at where are the weak points and attack those and kind of eliminate those. So, and then where there are opportunities for failure, at least have the oversight and touch points where we can immediately know if there's an issue, rather than have something, go on and on for some time and no one's aware of it.
Yeah. And I think that is an interesting point. Something that I do see value in as an operator is having that, what I would call overwatch, which is very similar to how we would have an overwatch on a BAS system or an alarm system or an HVAC system, where there is that ability for someone in the background to see, hey, this driver is running hot. There's something wonky about the readings we're getting from this driver out of 50 drivers in a case. And let me call somebody on site and say, hey, can you check this thing out? And or hey, we might need to just hot swap this thing. Having that extra layer of insurance, I think is definitely valuable. Because yeah, as much as HVAC failures are, the bane of everyone's existence, lighting failure is actually worse. You can struggle through the poor environment of an HVAC failure. There's nothing you can do if you have no light. So, yeah, absolutely critical. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, because like I said at the beginning, right? We've known each other for a long time. We've been in each other's orbit at, whether it's selling at trade shows, whether it's working with installations, all the things. You're the CEO and founder of the company, but you're not sitting in your corner office, somewhere and working from there. You're very much in the field. You're very much, out with the customers, whether it's prospective new customers that you're educating on your solutions, whether it's customers that are installing your solutions, or even that service after the fact. What were you seeing? What is different today that the cultivators, that the CFO, CEOs, that the owner operators are thinking about, asking for, looking for, expecting? What's different today than it was? We don't have to go back 10 years because certainly everything's different from 10 years ago, but even 5 years ago, say like 2020, 2021, what has changed and what are you seeing today that's different?
I think one of the things that, we're seeing today is as this industry has matured, sometimes and with its maturity brought challenges to a lot of cultivators, which is profitability, as in different states, question marks about legalization or rescheduling or other things. I think the thing that I'm seeing a lot when I talk to owners and operators is really the desire to have um, the systems and solutions and or ability to be viable on the longer term. Profitability is key, making sure that they're investing in technology. There's so much technology and things out there, but really zeroing in on what is really going to make them more money or help them be more profitable while allowing them to operate much more efficiently. So they're really looking to really drive efficiencies out of their operation and design facilities that are efficient, whether it's reducing CapEx upfront, and or putting in, technology that's going to help them be relevant in the future. There's a lot of questions now that they weren't, around rescheduling and DEA and EU GMP and GACP, and can I export and can I sell it across in the future state lines, and how am I going to be relevant to that? And those are real questions, especially as new states and new operators come online, that are very important to consider and are being considered now that really were never being considered before. And they're taking that into account when they talk to, when I talk to them and when they look at solutions like ours, or data is important and other things, versus 5 years ago. I mean, it was just, the price is here. We want to be up and running. The vision was that this was a market that was, couldn't, the price couldn't go down. It was really an unlimited market, and let's build, and be up and running as quickly as possible, and start producing, revenue. And huge facilities were being built, all at once, and then being turned on all at once. And we all know there was a lot of challenges, whether it's HVAC or lighting or systems or operations or, procedures or running through or just manning a large facility like that. And now it's much more managed, to stage it, to maybe build out in phases, make sure things are operational. So I think a lot more care and consideration is going in now for long-term success, rather than just, thinking that, that this is going to be an unlimited market to make money, which,
Sure.
there's no reason to not think that, but as we know, some of the state rules, the requirements, legislation, whatever it is, has really made it challenging for a lot of operators.
Yeah. So a little more conservative. Well, it sounds like a little more thought towards future proofing, if you
Yep.
will, for these facilities. That certainly, aligns with what I've seen here in the US. I know you've worked in the Netherlands. I think that, I've seen some pictures of a beautiful facility that got built there. I know you're doing work in Germany and other areas in Europe. What's the difference in those markets versus US customer base?
What I, in Europe, I would say there's much more planning. I shouldn't say much more planning, but they're really thinking long term, and they're really building out and designing for medical facilities, like pharmaceutical grade medical facilities. They are thinking about producing medicine. The market there is very geared towards that, with GMP and GACP, or EU GMP and GACP. So they're very cognizant on systems, operational, how they operate. A lot of consideration for having true clean rooms where nobody goes in, and then maintenance areas for HVAC or lighting or our, power servers or other things, and having those in a completely different area. So a lot more focused on really designing for, EU GMP and really pharmaceutical grade facilities, and thinking about those systems and operations. And they think about the long term, 10 years out, 15 years out, and really being consistent and operationally viable in that point. And they're designing for, they take much longer to design, they take a lot longer to approve. The regulations are much stronger, I think. It's not really designed to be a rec market at this time. And so they put a lot into that system and planning. So much more longer term design process, planning process to get through. And
Mhm.
for on the medical side, you can't just get up and running and start selling. So it's a much longer process. So it can be challenging over there as well, but I would say that's the biggest difference. Where here, there's a much, it's a recreational market within each state, and there's you can be operational much faster, and getting to revenue much faster here than you can in the EU. So for that very reason, it's important for them to design it properly so that when they do start reaching revenue, they can make money.
So when everything you just told me about that market, my brain goes to that all goes to making it more expensive to build these places, right? Whether it's coming up to UGMP standards, the timeline, the segregated spaces, all that stuff, right? Whether you look at it as a gross square foot or canopy square foot metric, the number is going up, right? Um, are you finding that they're less price sensitive? Are you finding that they're investing more? Are you finding that they are just building smaller to start? Like, how did they balance the increased cost of entering those markets versus maybe, North American operators?
Actually, in all honesty, I would not say it's the timeline is longer, so patience is more patience is required. Um, and you probably need you do, depending on the country. I will say there are country caveats on how long it takes, where it can be quite expensive if you don't do it properly, where it can really cost you a lot of money to operate for a long time just to wait to get approvals. So you have to balance that and design that properly. But the facilities that are being built are not, they're very CapEx conscious. They are making extremely conscious decisions on CapEx and how they're building out, and even the workflow and everything else, so that they're designing to be actually a very low cost operation in actuality, and taking a long time to really think that through and plan that out. But I would say the cost of operations is not very high. The CapEx is extremely competitive. probably lower CapEx, I would say, than even in the US. It's much more competitive on a CapEx perspective over there than here.
Interesting.
The cost to build, you would be, I think, you would actually, you're very conscious on CapEx and building out and really how you build your facilities for long-term success. In the work we've done together, I see that, and I think that's very important. You'd be very impressed with, I think, some of the things that they do and how they're going about building out on a CapEx perspective. It's more the time that it takes to get going, is the biggest cost over there.
Okay. It's interesting. It's great. It's great to hear the perspective on a market that, honestly, I really, have zero touch points to at this point in time. A little bit early on, and when I was in different roles, but not today. So it's great information.
Berlin next year, come on.
Berlin next year, yeah, or Spanibus, or yeah, I don't know. I see everybody having a good time over there. Maybe one of these years I'll make it. Honestly, I mean, if I was going back overseas for a trade show, it would be Green Tech. I went to Green Tech one year and it was like a kid in a candy shop, literally. I mean, I couldn't get enough. I loved it. Like everything, the automation, I love automation and it was just that's where I love. Plus, the Netherlands is it's just a great, and Amsterdam's just a great place to visit and such an easy trip to make, really. That it's a lot of fun. But Green Tech's my favorite for what it's worth. But maybe one of these years I'll go to Berlin and I'll say, well, this one's my favorite now. Um, so, one of the things that is coming up a lot, both in my professional life, design build, retrofits, as we've interviewed people on the show and talked to a lot of different, growers, operators, people in design build, people in different walks of life within the cannabis cultivation space is under canopy lighting. And, people have heard me talk about this, know that I resisted it for a long time. Still have questions. I'm not, 100% sold, but I'm a lot closer today than I ever have been on it. I have seen it do some pretty awesome things. I think there's some challenges when it comes to certain building methodologies and or whether it's a new build versus a retrofit, how the building was originally built, if it is a retrofit, things like that. But I know that you are providing under canopy lighting in the market. I know you're also working with a company that provides a side lighting option. Um, Talk to me, what are you seeing? What are you seeing besides like everybody wants them and everybody's putting them in and it's 50% more weed. I got it. For adding, as I said to one guy who was selling under canopies, fully understood that more equals more. Like fully understood that more photons equals more plant. Got it. I don't need to be sold on that. I understand how that works. It's the impact of everything else that I get, somewhat nervous about. But what are you seeing?
Well, I think the perfect environment is the sun, right? And the sun has a tremendous amount of energy, perfect light, really full high penetration, all the spectrums to get in and around and in between leaves and underneath and all around a plant. And I think as we've moved into the market, you've had HPS, we've moved into LED and top lighting, but with anything, you have an inverse square law of light penetration. So if you have an LED light, you move, and it's 2 feet away, or 6 inches away from the plant, you double that distance. It's 25% less light. So you have
So
that.
I don't mean to cut you off, but so that's, for someone like me that's kind of a moron and doesn't know what inverse square law means off the top of my head. I get what you're saying is that, when you go from 6 inches to 12 inches, you've cut the intensity of those photons by 25%. That's what inverse square law means.
Right.
Okay. All right. Just wanted to make sure.
And so when you have a sun beating down on, the sun is basically unlimited energy. And when you have an LED and you have limited power to deliver to the plant, it's huge. So I think what under canopy or side, truly or supplemental lighting truly allows for is really the ability to bring light into the plant everywhere and now fill that plant's volume or the air around that plant in and around it with more light so that you can effectively grow more optimally grow flower on that plant or grow that plant. And so that's what we're truly under canopy and side lighting and everything is bringing that capability. And that's why you're seeing increases in yield and you're seeing increases in output and you're seeing, you know, much more uniformity between, A bud and B bud and C bud and across the whole plant, you're seeing higher output, higher uniformity of bud structure and size. And then also, with that, you get lower labor costs because now you're growing more on the bottom underneath the plant and in and around. So you have less labor and everything that you need to bring to the plant, and so you get a more holistic grow. I think is ultimately the outcome. Now, if you design for that from the beginning, great. Because when you add more light, you do add more energy. The plant is going to, transpire more, the plant's going to feed more, it's going to consume more electricity. So all of those things are going to require more systems in your facility. So when you come into an existing facility or room, you have to be able to handle those excess or the increased capacity of heat, transpiration, feeding, CO2, everything. You're going to put more into the plant to get more out. But another way to look at it too is you could effectively reduce your top light. If you're limited on energy, you still would get more by reducing your top light and adding underneath under canopy or side lighting or even 360 lighting all the way around. You would, by taking all the light you had available and putting it more holistically into that plant, you would get more out of that plant. Um,
And
and
that's,
I think that
yeah,
so that's at a basic. Now, if you
yeah,
have more capacity in the room, then
yeah.
add more dehumidification and you can get more.
And that for me, right, I think is like the holy grail of the equation for, it's redistributing the wattage into the plant structure, but not necessarily increasing the heat load, the load that I'm putting into that room, dependent on the project, right? Like that's kind of what I really want to see. I'd love to see data or speak with growers that, did reduce the top light intensity and just redistributed into the canopy. And then where did that get you, right? Now, are you
We're doing some trials with that now. and
cool?
and that should have some data soon on that. But I think what we're seeing is 100%. You're seeing an improvement
Yeah,
because
yeah.
at the same time you can cut your labor by adding light underneath. You want to reduce how much you're defoliating the plant. You want more growth under the plant. So you win also because you can cut labor out of your equation.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, and that's along the lines of what I've seen in real time is that yes, power consumption goes up, yes, water and nutrient consumption goes up, yes, the demand on the environment goes, increases, but the labor does not increase linearly to the increased yield output, and there's your profit, right? There's your bottom line. Are you seeing as customers are adopting under canopies, are they going into facilities that were built for 1,000-watt HPS, they switched to an LED top light, and then they added under canopy, so they've got extra capacity in the utility of the building? Or are you seeing where they're adding under canopy and they're adding more HVAC, more electric? Are you seeing where they're adding under canopy and not adding anything and just sacrificing environmental control and bandwidth? How are those playing out?
Yes, all,
All
all,
of it.
all of it. We are, if you're going in HPS, if you have 1,000 watts of HPS and you're going with LED, I mean, that's a prime opportunity where you could take that 1,000 watts at the top. You can go in with an LED retrofit that's going to give you even, at 75% energy, give you more output than the HPS. And now you can add supplemental lighting, under canopy lighting, and get even more yield, significantly more yield out of the plant. And then we have, some customers are just adding it in and maybe dimming the lights down a little bit at the top. But I would say generally, at the same time that there are trials that happen where people realize the benefit, but they are limited by infrastructure, and they just don't have the HVAC. They don't have the infrastructure to really take advantage of it in their existing operation. And that's a reality in some applications. I mean, I was at Hall of Flowers and talking to a couple growers up there, and they just said, they can't, they won't, they don't have, because of all the other things that come with it that you talked about, the, extra transpiration, extra feeding, the CO2, all of those things, they don't have those systems in place. And so they are not doing it for that very reason. So there are, in some instances, it just doesn't work. I
Yeah,
mean, it would
absolutely.
work, but you don't have the facility and infrastructure to support it.
Sure. Yeah. No, that makes sense. So as you're, over the years, really you're a solutions provider, lighting obviously being very critical to controlled environment agriculture. You're also an integrator, right, of your solution to a much broader package that looks like a full construction set. It looks like your electrical consumption and your amperage. It looks like your heat generation in the room and all these types of things. How have you evolved over the years to be able to integrate, to these packages in a way that brings value and ensures that when your product goes into the final solution, it's not blamed. And where that question comes from is that, early years when I started like selling into commercial facilities and doing design build and stuff in commercial facilities, a lot of times we'd see where well, the HVAC wasn't working right, but they'd say it's the lights, or they'd say it's the control system, right? And that's not, no, it's just the HVAC is too small, and that was somebody else's package in this job of, 25 providers. So, you have to learn, in my experience, I had to learn about all these other systems and all these other trades and everything else so that I could integrate my piece. How have you done that? What's been your experience?
I think you have to ask a lot of questions. And I think with we make lights with a driver. If retrofitting, you want to plug it in and use it, that's fine too. But we focus very heavily on new construction. And in new construction, we've always felt that for success, like for our success, our customer's success is our success. And collectively, we have to be successful. And we have always felt that, we can't have silos. We have to have, everybody's got to know what's going on and be asking questions and aware of it. And we just always have been very direct in asking questions and trying to understand so that we can make the best impact or help the customer be successful. We've always tried to understand the HVAC, what they're doing for a building management system and controls and fertigation and HVAC and dehumidification and lighting, and how is this all coming together. And so we have many times, we've become very we volunteer. We've been on construction calls and on projects that take 2 years, and you get on the weekly call and whatever, and maybe we're not really involved early in every instance, but we felt it's important to be there involved, and we kind of become a customer advocate, and just be there in terms of trying to point out or just make the customer aware and understand, or suggest that they ask this question or make sure, because we've always, we want to make sure that customer is successful so that there's no finger pointing, and so that in the long term we're all operational and successful, and we have another successful customer to point to. But it's always been about asking questions and
Yeah.
trying to learn and understand what they're doing and why they're doing it.
Yeah.
And usually in those conversations it can come out, but that's been, and then also from asking questions, how can we be more effective in what we do to deliver a better solution for them, whether it's better drawings, better software, better integration, can we modify things? Can we talk to, BACnet IP or talking to GrowLink or Rhythm or, how do we better integrate to help the customer? And all of those things have been important, but it's really been about asking questions first and
Mm.
foremost, and and always trying to be honest with the customer and just do what's necessary for the project to
Yeah.
be a success.
Yeah, no, 100%. So, we talked about like data, right? And your ability to extract data from the way your system operates and use that for various purposes of management of the facility. There's also, I've heard talk of lighting as a service. I've heard, I've never used these, but I've seen fixtures that have cameras on them, that have other sensors on them, that are integrated largely to maybe the BAS or a standalone dashboard that you can operate from. What do you see as the future of horticultural lighting? Where is it headed? And I would piggyback on that question. When is the next big jump in efficiency of the LEDs?
I think, yeah, great questions. I think from looking ahead, I think the biggest thing is trying to make the tech simple but effective and as integratable as possible. um, and sometimes when you add lots and lots of features into a product, it can get very complicated, expensive, and harder to manipulate. So I see in the future a lot more efficiency in terms of using data and using the tools that are available. So spectral tuning obviously will become more and more important as we learn more, but not, not like 7 channels. Like let's, optimize spectral tuning, maybe seasonal effects within the plant, maybe some, far right obviously has a big impact, maybe, some major things. So some spectral tuning, that's becoming much more important, being intelligent on how you're using the data and optimizing power levels and light for the crop that for the crop you're growing, for the strain you're growing. I see, environmental microclimates, really adjusting light levels or other things to microclimates. We're having some conversations with how do we know maybe whether the plant is truly kind of, really alive and not alive, but, is it taking a nap? Does it need all the light at that time? Like, how do we start to optimize energy and how we deliver light to plants? Those things are happening. So I think that's where some automations, and intelligence will come into play. Maybe optimizing and growing for VPDs or those kinds of things where you really can start to gather the information that's in the room, whether it's sensor data, environmental temperature, humidity, CO2, and then using technology to optimize lights and other things and fertigation to really drive the plant. And that's where I think that's where I see lighting going. I think lighting has gotten complicated right now. To me, a little bit overcomplicated. Lots, in some cases, too many channels, too many different things, too many knobs. We're trying to simplify things and go into a production environment where we can take a set of tools and optimize what we're doing. Right now, if we're growing with one channel and one zone in a room, maybe we're 75% optimized. What can we do there? Well, let's add more zones. Let's really know what's going on. Maybe that takes us to 85%.
Mhm.
Maybe we add one channel and we can kind of crop steer the lights for the fertigation. That takes us to 95. So what can we do to incrementally get there to optimize what we're doing and lower costs, because we can't be adding all these bells and whistles that are going to add a lot of costs. That's where I see really optimization going in large scale, production, and then, as well as optimizing how and where we deliver the light. I think
Yeah.
that's the biggest gain I see over the next few years, and then using intelligence, like I said, to drive that and optimize that automatically based on what the crop is doing or what the room is doing. Um, from an LED perspective, I mean, blue diodes are already extremely efficient. Red diodes are, have kind of reached some of their high level of, optimization in the current state or technology in terms of, of efficiency. And I think, if you use just pure red, you'd be up somewhere around four micromoles per joule. But, you have to look at what's a balanced, optimized spectrum for the plant that you're growing. And, as you know, too much red, in the ratio, you're going to have bleaching and other things. So you really need to be optimized in what you're doing. And I think we're probably at a pretty good optimization now. I mean, maybe in the next few years you're going to see us getting to over 3 with a fully balanced spectrum to drive the plant. Maybe we'll probably learn more through measuring different light spectrums throughout the day and maybe being more efficient in how we use the different spectrums and blending it through a day. That's an opportunity rather than having it all at one time. But I think diode LEDs are pretty efficient at the moment. The inefficiency comes down to the conversion of phosphor, on a blue LED. But just like
What do you mean by that? The conversion of phosphor on blue LED. What does that mean?
a lot of LEDs actually, like the yellow LEDs that you see, it's a blue LED, and then they you'll put phosphor on top of it, different phosphors, and the blue is shining um, through the phosphor to give you a yellow or different hues of orange. It's not actually an orange LED. It's not really it's not a yellow LED. The highest efficient LEDs are blue and red. And so you're adding phosphor on top of the blue diode to give you your spectrum. And that's why you actually see even if you had a yellow light, but you'd have a blue peak. That's why you see a big blue peak and then a drop off, right? Kind of as you come down to, between blue and kind of in the green area, you have a drop off.
Mhm.
And we're constantly trying to optimize that with bringing in more efficient green LEDs and other things in the 520 peak area to really optimize the spectrum for the plants. But um, there's only so many frequencies or wavelengths of light that are efficient and available to use. And right now, that's kind of where we're at. I think just like we see in in semiconductors, they've taken some leaps now in terms of density for data storage and other things. I think you'll see at some point, maybe in the future, you'll see a leap again in wavelengths and efficiency of light conversion. But we're pretty efficient right now in terms of diodes and availability.
So is a white LED white, or is it a different color that's been manipulated with phosphor?
It's a blue LED
Huh. Okay.
that's been manipulated with phosphor. And
Interesting.
that's why the white LED is less efficient than
Hmm.
a blue LED
Got it.
or a red. The red and blue are true diodes. And then you have green. Green is not has a lower efficiency. And through manipulation of those different spectrums and which reds you use, whether it's a 660 or 640, 730 far red, blending that with the blues and the whites to get you your, full spectrum. But ultimately, right, a 3 micromole per joule for a full spectrum is pretty efficient. When you see lighting companies advertise 4 micromoles per joule. Well, yeah, that's if just the red LED is on.
Mhm.
It's just a red spectrum.
Right, right. And you mentioned it, tip bleaching, photo bleaching, right? Which I've heard isn't really an accurate name for it, although it's what we're all kind of calling it, right? It's because it's not really being bleached so much as it's not producing chlorophyll. So it's not like it produced chlorophyll and then got bleached and the chlorophyll, it just never produced the chlorophyll on the tips. But we're seeing that with the reds. Where is the threshold? In your experience, you're selling LEDs, you're obviously using red diodes, you're using far red diodes, but these types of things to get to your spectrum and your efficiency. What's the threshold of red light and where in that spectrum does it fall that or do we know yet that's causing this behavior, this photo bleaching in cannabis?
I think it's a little bit of, from our experience, it's a little bit of everything. You have ratios. We focus very much on ratios of different wavelengths together, and that's how we optimize the effect of delivering each wavelength to the plant. If you just had blue and red, like the old blurple days, you
Hmm.
know, that's an efficient, it's a very, today, in today's spectrum, it's a very efficient, light. But um, just having those two wavelengths is not going to be very effective for the plant. You'll have the bleaching as we described. The growth will be a little bit off, and it's just not going to be true a perfect spectral delivery to the plant. So how do we optimize how we deliver the light to the plants? And one of the things we worked very hard with in the plant scientists we worked with is looking at the ratios of different spectrums, and having far red in there, a lot of people would argue, well, you're going to put the plant to sleep, you're going to have stretching. But if you put it in at a specific ratio to red, then you actually can have a very effective delivery, not only of the red and far red, but you can help trigger flower development. And that's why we've always had higher TAC, terpene, better, color profile versus when we've gone up head to head against other plants, other lights. But it can't be just that. It also has to have a ratio of blue to red. And then within that, if you don't have a good ratio of green and or kind of, green wavelength as well as some orange and yellow in there, all of those together help deliver all of the spectrums and wavelengths effectively to the plant. If
Hmm.
they're off in terms of ratio, then the effective delivery is off. You may get some bleaching, you may get some other things. So you can have high red, but you have to have other things in balance and in ratio to all the spectrums together. And I think that's where sometimes, in the past, I think a lot of spectrums have gotten much better and lighting companies, but that has always been one thing that we've seen, that you can see a spectrum has too much blue in it. One might have too much red. Very often, nobody puts far red in there. It's an added cost, but if you have it in there and have all of those things that are good balanced spectrum and ratio, you will be very effective at delivering that spectrum to the plant. So you don't need 3.2, micromoles per joule, because that may be less effective at growing the plant than a 2.7 with an optimized spectrum.
Interesting. Great. Well, I do love nerding out on this stuff. It's so much fun. I mean, every little piece of the control environment ag space, right? All of the million parts and pieces that we put into, whether it's a, old warehouse, whether it's a greenhouse, and we have to get them all to work together, all for the effort and the joy of growing 1,000, living, breathing organisms inside of a living, breathing machine. So it's a lot of fun to talk to you about this stuff. As we're coming to the end of our time together today, any last thoughts on, what you want to share with people, what you want them to know about the work you're up to and how you're helping advance CEA as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll make one last one, and then I have a question for you. But the what I'd like to say is, one of the things that I find is truly important. Um, I mean, from any company, and I think service and support is really paramount, and that is very often overlooked. The value of service and support from a company, and sure, you can get, cost-effective things, and you can buy lots of extra items, but there is at some level the importance of service support, and you had touched upon it I'm hands-on. I like to talk to customers. I'm involved. I think it's just the culture that we have at TSRgrow is that it's very important that customers are able to get a hold of any of us at any time, and we're all here to help the customer be successful. And that's just ingrained in how we do business. It's ingrained in how we support customers, and it's why customers will always say that, there's, there's the service and support is unparalleled, along with what I like to think is, the products as well. But that's just such an important piece that that I hope, that I encourage customers to continue to really focus on that and consider that, along with all the value of all the other solution features that we bring to the table. But really, it's such a critical piece and in what we do. And I think that's just an area that we focus heavily on. So hopefully
Yeah.
you realize it when we service you or anybody else.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that's the most important thing.
Yeah, 100%, right? It's I always say it's people, plants, profits. The people have to come first in every equation, whether it's with your vendors, your service providers, your people on site, your staff. People always come first in the equation of success. And we were talking about earlier, like the all equipment has a failure rate, and there's been, everyone's had the experience of like large scale failure rates. And I've had those experiences with various companies over the years. And it all comes down to how they handle the mistake from a customer service standpoint, right? Like, do they just immediately take care of it, or does it drag out? Is it hard to get that service? And, as somebody who sold and bought and transacted hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars with many of the very large companies in this space, I can say that there's very few CEOs I have on speed dial, and you're one of them. And so I've always appreciated that I have a direct line when I'm in need because I'm not really patient. So it's good. So yeah, so I appreciate it, man. It's good
Well,
talking.
it's definitely been I mean, yeah, we've seen and worked together, many times over the years, but it's certainly been a pleasure and extremely excited to have you part of the podcast and here speaking with me. But I would, from your perspective, you asked me earlier, but 5 years, maybe not going back 10 years, but over the last 5 years, I mean, you've seen and been a part of multiple parts or value, points in the industry and the value chain of working in the industry. But where do you see, kind of this all going, and from where we've come to where we've gone, where do you see the industry going to, and maybe even in looking ahead to the international side, but from 5 years ago to now, where do you kind of see it's gone, and what's your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, so 5 years ago, was it Bernanke that coined the term irrational exuberance? He didn't coin it 5 years ago, but 5 years ago we were in irrational exuberance. We were in irrational exuberance when high hopes, when state legalization started to happen,
Yeah.
and you could, win the golden ticket in a market, and you were going to build the biggest and the best, and all these kinds of things were happening, and all this money was flooding in, and things were spent willy-nilly, and facilities were not getting built well at all. At that point in time, there was a lot of issues with the integration and the sizing of things and all that stuff. And then they hit a slump. The market hit a slump right before COVID. And in fact, when COVID hit, I had, money all over the place in terms of like product on the water, jobs half built that stopped paying their bills, at the first, few weeks or a couple of months maybe of COVID when everybody was freaking out. And then all of a sudden people started hoarding cannabis the way they were hoarding toilet paper. The company said, "Oh my gosh, this is," and they were back to irrational exuberance, right? This is never going to end. This is the way it is now, and they started like doubling down, right? Trying to build the places even faster, even bigger, brought on all this capacity, and then the market went back to normal when you weren't waiting in line for an hour or whatever to get into a dispensary because of social distancing, and okay, it went back to normal, and they had excess capacity. price compression started to hit in a very real way, in many of the markets. And so I think, for those who survive that, and we're still seeing the ripple effects of those decisions. I think it's really interesting when you look at the trajectory of some, larger, companies that maybe had a lot of cash at one point. It takes 4 or 5 years for bad decisions to wash out. And so, we're seeing that now in distressed assets and companies closing down. I mean, here in Colorado, we've seen a number of quite a large number of grows just turn off the lights and we're done. We're out of the market, right? The price is too low. We cannot manufacture this product and do it profitably anymore. So, I think it's become for those that will sort of, survive, being conservative with capital is absolutely critical. And at the same time, that future proofing that you talked about. And that's something that's a fine line that I'm constantly walking, right? Is that I can't build a facility today, maybe because of the capital constraints that exist across the board in the market in the US. I can't build it with, a high level of automation, let's say. But I can think, how wide do the hallways in this building need to be to allow me to introduce automation at some point in the future that might look like this without me sacrificing the cost to build today and or spending money today on a future promise. And oftentimes that's what I saw a lot of was spending money today on the future ideas, right? We're going to invest in this electrical infrastructure because down the road we're going to need it, right? And so I'm always walking this fine line of just being really conservative today and trying to make, the best choices possible while still an eye towards the future, an eye towards that phased approach, right? A lot more phasing, a lot less we're going to build 100,000 square feet of canopy and turn it on day one, kind of approach. More like, hey, let's build 10,000 square feet of flower and see if the market adoption is there and judge it and get some cash flow out of this building and then, add another 5, 10 or whatever that looks like up to the canopy caps. And so, I think that overall though, and I've held this belief for a long time, because cannabis has the value that it has, and because the people who are willing to invest in cannabis and wanting to work in cannabis tend to have, I think, a high appetite for risk. We push the boundaries on the tech fast, right? And I think, LEDs would not be where they are today. Horticultural LED would not be where it is today if it hadn't been for the explosion of cannabis over the last 10 years,
100%,
right?
100%.
So that has this beautiful ripple effect on CEA, controlled environment agriculture as a whole, for food production, for other medicinals, for other, crop types, for putting, cultivation centers in areas, in the middle of a desert or in an area that's wouldn't typically be able to produce food, right? I think there's really, really interesting stuff going on in like Dubai and UAE and Saudi Arabia. Like I'm watching some of the stuff they're working on over there, and I'm just fascinated by it. I think it's really, really amazing. I don't know if the people involved in those projects realize it. The technology they're adopting or they're trying to integrate would not be there for them today. Again, my opinion, I talk a lot of shit, but it wouldn't be there today if it weren't for the last 10 years of US cannabis industry. And I think that's pretty cool. And I think that's going to continue.
Yeah, the power density of cannabis really drove a lot of I mean we've been in it, right? On the lighting side. It drove a lot of development and really enabled LEDs to become what they are today. I would agree with you.
Yeah, 100%,
Yep.
100%, man. Listen, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you today, sir.
Likewise.
We talk pretty frequently on the side, but never, do we record it? This was probably a good thing. So today we got to record it, and I hope people enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much again, Mark. Really, truly appreciate it. And it's been a pleasure chatting.
Thanks, Mikhail.
All right.